Good morning. Welcome to today's webinar sponsored by SCORE and DGS, the state of California. Today's webinar is Contracting with California State Government. It's being recorded. You will receive a link to the recording and a copy of the presentation with all the recommended links in a hyperlink form. It will be emailed to you after the presentation. We would ask that if you have a question, you type it in the Q&A or the chat, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. So we want to take a poll at this time, and this poll will give us a little bit of information on how to best serve you. The first question in the poll is, were you able to receive a certification number from what you learned from the previous sessions? If you were in those sessions, you knew how to do that, and you know whether that is a yes or no. Number two, do you have a mentor assigned to you to help complete your certification or questions you may have? So that's yes or no. The third question is, do you have any questions about the attachments that were emailed to you so far? Just yes or no, and I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to answer this, and then we'll announce the results. Okay, here are the results. Congratulations to the 75% of you who have already received your number. Number two, a quarter of you have been assigned a mentor. We certainly recommend that every time we have an opportunity that you request one, because it can be extremely helpful for both this process and your business plan. And the third question is, do you have questions about the attachments? So they must have been clear, because 100% of those answering the poll said that they have no questions about the attachments. So at this time, I would like to introduce, coming from the state of California, who will introduce himself a little more completely, Matt Zweier. Thank you, Matt.
Hello, thank you so much, Tom, for the introduction. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be with us and learn about contracting with California state government. So as Tom had mentioned, I am Matt Zweier. I'm from the California Department of General Services, specifically the Office of Small Business and Disabled Veteran Business Enterprises. And today we're talking about contracting with California state government. As Tom had mentioned, there were 2 sessions we've already done on this subject, kind of covering the introductory, how do you get set up in Cali Procure, get your business registered, certified, a second presentation on really improving your profile and doing marketing and research. And in this third presentation, we're going to be taking a much deeper dive into the state contracting process at the state of California. So the main things that we're going to be covering today are these. We're going to take a look at how the state buys, kind of the actual process the state uses when it needs to purchase anything, a good or a service. We're going to dive into a few details on that. We're going to look at contracts that are actually exempt from advertising and how you can best position yourself to get those. We're going to take a look at something called leverage procurement agreements, also called statewide contracts. We're going to look at a few other procurement methods we think you are likely to encounter in your efforts to contract with the state of California. Then we're going to be talking about contract readiness. So what puts you in a good position to actually bid on a state contract and be successful at winning that state contract. That'll include some common mistakes to avoid and some tips for success. Then lastly, we'll finish up by talking about commercially useful function. This was probably mentioned in one of the previous webinars, but it's always a good subject to bring back and talk about again because it is very important. And then lastly, we'll share some resources, again, similar to our previous presentations. So with that, let's jump right in. So let's talk about how the state buys. So when the state buys, of course, it's expending taxpayer dollars. You all are likely taxpayers. The state purchasing process is influenced by lots of rules, regulations, and laws. We also have something called the State Contracting Manual. It's actually a manual that we have to follow when we actually want to do purchasing. No surprising, it is government. And all these rules and laws and regulations coalesce into what we call acquisition methods. These are specific, distinct processes for being able to purchase a particular good or service. And kind of the best way to think about it is in comparing it to how you and I might purchase things as just a person. Typically, if we want to purchase something as people, we just think about it. Do we have a need for it? Is it worth the price? Great. And then we go and buy it. We just walk into a store and we swipe our credit card and we purchase it, or we go online and we purchase it. And it's really that simple, but it's not that simple for the state. Again, because we're spending taxpayer dollars, and the taxpayers are very concerned about how their money is spent, rightfully so, and they want to make sure the money is spent well. And there's all sorts of laws and rules and regulations that kind of dictate how the state is allowed to purchase. And that's to ensure purchasing is, it's done fairly and appropriately, that taxpayer dollars are not wasted, all of that. And so it coalesces into specific processes called acquisition methods. And these are the processes that buyers throughout the state have to follow. Now, it's important for you to know this because understanding the specific acquisition method being used to conduct a particular purchase will help you better understand how to respond to that bid solicitation, if it's worthwhile for you to actually pursue this opportunity, and what you need to do in order to be successful. So hopefully that's what you're going to walk away with is a better understanding of these acquisition methods, so that when you actually notice an opportunity saying, oh, the state wants to buy a service or a product that I sell, let me take a look at what that acquisition method is. And that gives me an idea of if it's a good opportunity for me and how best to respond so I can be successful. And of course, the things that determine which acquisition method are used is how much money is being spent, what is being purchased, and some other specific terms and conditions. So let's dive into kind of the first grouping of acquisition methods we want to talk about, and that is contracts that are exempt from advertising. So there's a whole group of contracts that are actually exempt from public competitive advertising. You got introduced to Cali Procure in the previous webinars. That's where all public competitive bidding is done. Not all acquisition methods are done in public competitive bidding. Some are actually exempt from advertising. And we're not going to go into all the acquisition methods. There's probably more than 30 of them. We're going to talk about a very small set. So the ones that are not, advertised on Cali Procure, that are exempt from advertising, so they're not on Cali Procure, you will not get a system notification from Cali Procure because it's not conducted on Cali Procure. It's typically an informal bidding process, meaning the buyer who's in charge of conducting the purchase is going to email you or is going to give you a phone call, and that will be how you get included. Buyers will go on to Cali Procure and they will search for businesses that they think can meet the procurement need. So again, this is where it's critical that you have a robust and accurate profile on Cali Procure, because if the only way a buyer can email you or call you is if they can look up your business on Cali Procure. And the only way they can look you up on Cali Procure is if you have adequate keywords and codes on your profile. So that's why we've stressed keywords and codes so much in both the first and the second presentations that you saw. So let's take a look at the three most common contracts that are exempt from advertising that you should know about. Some of these might look a little bit familiar. They're called fair and reasonable, SBDVBE option, and emergency contracting. There are others, but again, these are just the three that we're going to talk about that are most specific to you. And let's go through them one at a time. So fair and reasonable, these are for very small purchases, less than $10,000. The buyer just needs to get one quote, and that one quote needs to be deemed fair and reasonable. It's typically that judgment is made based off of industry or pricing standards, what's been purchased before very recently. So if the state bought something for $100 2 weeks ago, it's probably fair and reasonable to buy it again for that same price now. Fair and reasonable typically is awarded to the lowest bidder. and it can go to a certified business like an SB or a DVB or even a non-certified business. What's really critical about this is that the buyer only needs one quote. So if a buyer emails 20 businesses saying, I need someone that has these products, and a few people respond, and one of those, is considered fair and reasonable and it's lowest, the buyer is going to purchase from them. And if you're not one of those people, maybe you took too long, maybe you took a few days to read it and respond, you could miss out. So something important to keep in mind there, being responsive. The next acquisition method we're going to take a look at is SB DVB option. And this might have been mentioned before in a previous webinar, so you might be a little bit familiar with it. So this is for slightly bigger procurements, still on the small side from the state's perspective, up to $250,000, or if it's public works, up to $388,000. Now, I don't know about you, but to me, $250,000 is a lot of money. That's not a small amount of money. But again, from the state's perspective, that's a relatively small amount, given that the state spends billions of dollars every year in contract work. What's really unique about this acquisition method is it's exclusive to certified businesses, SB, SBPW, and DVPE. So that's a really, really great advantageous for you. It means you will not be going up and competing against large corporations or businesses that are not certified. It also means that if you want to be included in these procurements, you have to get certified and you have to keep up on your certification. It does mean you will be competing against other certified businesses, but the buyer is only going to have to collect 2 quotes from either 2 small businesses or 2 DVBEs. They can't mix and match, so it's either 2 SBs or 2 DVBEs, and they're typically going to go with the lowest one. Again, this is another example of the buyer needs to be able to find your company on CaliProcure, and when you do get that email, you do need to be able to respond in a timely manner, because if the buyer gets 2 quotes and they both look great, and one of them's the better one, they're going to go with that quote. So again, got to be responsive to that email. So let's move on to the very last one, which is emergency contracting. This is a really big thing right now. The state does have a lot of emergencies. We have fires, we have floods, we have earthquakes. Of course, we have COVID, pandemics kind of being the biggest thing right now. And we do have other emergencies as well, landslides. And emergency purchasing as a whole is done very, very different. I talked about those rules, regulations, laws. Well, when it comes to emergency, the laws are all very different around it. When an emergency strikes, state entities, state departments, agencies are empowered to purchase pretty much whatever they need to address the emergency. Typical limits on spending are not applied, and departments act very, very fast. When a fire starts and it is raging, the state doesn't spend weeks writing up a statement of work and posting it on CaliProcure and collecting bids. No, the state needs to act within hours, right? Within days, the state needs to respond and deal with a fire or deal with a flood or something like that, or deal with the pandemic. So it's a very, very, very different kind of experience to be part of emergency contracting. There certainly is a lot of opportunity to sell to the state and support the state in responding to an emergency. And if you are interested in doing that, there's actually something special when it comes to emergency contracting. Because it is so unique and niche in the kind of work, we've actually established a specific registry of businesses separate from CaliProcure for emergency contracting. Right? It's called the SB DVBE Emergency Registry. It's only for certified businesses. So again, if you have to actually have your small business or your DVBE certification to get in this registry. And it essentially is a streamlined process that allows buyers throughout the entire state of California to come when an emergency strikes. They can come to this registry. It's an exclusive list of certified businesses that can perform emergency work to purchase. So, it is unusual when an emergency strikes. You can be prepared to be contacted at almost any hour. So you could get a call at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. You can be asked to perform work before a contract is even signed or a full statement of work is even written. Because again, state's got to respond in hours, not weeks. So a little bit more information on the registry. So it is a separate list from CaliProcure. It's used by State Department buyers. It only has certified businesses. You really do need to be ready and able to do emergency work. So this list is not designed to be aspirational. So if you've never done any kind of emergency response before and you think maybe you'd be open to it, you might not be quite ready for this registry, because when an emergency strikes and buyers are calling businesses, they really don't want to have to spend a half hour calling up and having conversations with businesses who can't really respond in an emergency, right? And as people, we also don't want the state to get delayed in responding to a fire or delayed in responding to a flood because the state wasn't able to find businesses that could assist in time, right? What's also different about this registry from CaliProcure is the way that you as a company identify what you sell. So in CaliProcure, you use your keywords to describe and you use your codes to describe. Well, in this, we actually have predetermined categories of goods and services specific for an emergency. Here's a list of those categories. I actually this isn't all the categories. I think this is actually just some of the categories. And I'm not going to read through it. You can kind of read through it and see kind of the type of categories that we have. There is actually a lot of different kind of stuff that the state needs when it comes to responding to an emergency. So this does give you a brief idea if you might be a good fit for emergency contracting or not. And of course, you can always go to the emergency registry. You'll be providing the information on how to actually do that. To get signed up, so if you actually want to get signed up, there's a few things you need. One, you will need your certification number. You have to put that in the system. That's how you show that you are in fact certified. You will also need to know which emergency registry categories you want to select, because you can't get in the registry without picking out those categories. You will be able to provide a written description of the products and services you sell, a short description, not a big paper, but a short description. You'll need your business address and then contact information. And we do have you designate an emergency contact. So after hours, that's the phone number that we can call at 2 o'clock in the morning and talk to somebody. And that will actually get answered at 2 o'clock in the morning. So that's emergency registry. That's the last thing that we're going to look at of contracts exempt from advertising. So as I mentioned, because the nature of emergencies, the state doesn't take the time to post the bid solicitation on CaliProcure and collect bids that way, right? So again, that is contracts exempt from advertising. So there's a decent amount of opportunity that is in those contracts exempt from advertising: the fair and reasonable, the SB DVBE option, and the emergency registry. But let's move on to our next kind of section of acquisition methods, and that's the leverage procurement agreements. So leverage procurement agreements, that's a term used by the state of California. LPA is what we call it for short. It's not a term that's used a whole lot throughout outside of state government and in the private sector. They're also called state contracts or statewide contracts. So these are contracts that my department actually creates, the Department of General Services, specifically the Procurement Division, which is the division that I'm in. We create and issue these contracts, and they're used by the entirety of the state. So they're used by state departments. They're also used by counties, schools, cities, and some other organizations. And the basic way that they work, and the reason that the state does them, is essentially when the state purchases the same good or service over and over and over again, many times throughout a given year, and every single year the state purchases a particular good or service. And every time we buy it, we pay pretty much the same amount of money, and most of the terms and conditions are the same. And so the state decides that, rather than every time we need to purchase a particular good or service, we're going to write a brand new statement of work and do a whole bid solicitation and put it out for bid. Let's just create a standing agreement that says whenever we need to purchase X, Y, or Z, we can, and there's set pricing, set terms and conditions, delivery, everything is all set in stone. Well, that is a leveraged procurement agreement. The state has a lot of different leveraged procurement agreements for lots of different things. So, for instance, rental cars, right? So the state does need at times rental cars for people traveling all over the state. And instead of writing a solicitation every single time the state needs to get a rental car, the state has a standing agreement with rental car companies that says, look, whenever we want to purchase rental car, we can do it for set pricing terms and conditions. So the contract itself is actually awarded for $0, right? Because the contract is just an agreement to purchase in the future, to purchase on demand when the need arises. So it's a little bit strange in that sense. But what it does mean is if you do get a leveraged procurement agreement, it's a lot of work up front to get that agreement, but then over the course of the entire agreement, the state can just purchase from you on demand for that set pricing terms and conditions. It's not 100% guarantee that you will be purchased from, that the state will buy from you, but it is a possibility. And that can be influenced by, is the leverage procurement agreement, is it awarded to more than one company, right? So is it awarded to several of them or just one of them, right? So you might have competitors. And it depends on, how long is the contract. It's common for a leverage procurement agreement to be 3 years or even 5 years, and it really just depends. So this is kind of the background on what a leverage procurement agreement is and how it works. Now, there are several types of them. I'm not actually going to take you through each of these and how they all work. These are just a few different types of leverage procurement agreements that the state of California does. You can probably guess by some of their titles what they focus on. The statewide commodity contracts is going to be for commodities rather than services, whereas the master service agreements are going to be for services. And of course, the software licensing program is all going to be about software. So again, I don't want to dive into each of these. The process for getting involved in each of these is a little bit different and it varies. So there's a website link there that takes you to the main leverage procurement agreement page where you can read more detailed information about each of these and how to get involved. Generally, the way that it works for all of these except CMAS, I will talk about the California Multiple Awards Schedule program in just a sec. So aside from CMAS, the way the rest of these mostly work is the contract is publicly advertised on CaliProcure, and there's a window to be able to bid and respond on it. And if it's a multiple award, then several businesses could be granted the agreement at the very end. Again, it's awarded for $0, but with the opportunity to purchase on demand. So it'd be advertised on CaliProcure. There'd be instructions about how to bid and how to respond, and you would need to follow that process. But let's talk about the California Multiple Awards Schedule program, because that one is a little bit different. We call it CMAS for short. It's at the top of this bulleted list. So CMAS, it is also used by state and local governments. It's for IT and non-IT goods and services. There's a lot of different stuff that is part of CMAS. And it actually works as an application. So our California Multiple Awards Schedule program mirrors and follows the General Services Administration, that's the federal government, and their Multiple Awards Schedule program. So a schedule essentially is a list of goods and services, or just goods or services that you can provide. And there are lots of different schedules. The General Services Administration of the federal government creates and maintains these schedules. And you, as a company, apply to become a holder of the schedule. The schedule has all sorts of set pricing and terms and conditions and everything. And you apply to become a holder of it. The application process is on the DGS website, and you can get there from the CaliProcure website. So I won't take you through that whole application process, but it's not the most complicated thing in the world. It's a lot simpler than the federal program's version. And essentially what it means is you apply. If you get your California Multiple Awards Schedule, you are then added to the pool of other businesses that have that same schedule. And when a buyer wants to purchase goods or services that are part of the schedule you hold, they go into the CMAS portal and they search, and you will show up on the list along with all the other businesses that hold that schedule that claim that they can sell those products or services. So again, it's not a guarantee that the state will buy from you, but it does get you into a pool of suppliers that can, and the state might be able to pick from you. So again, it is a little bit more work up front to be able to get that schedule, but once you do, and I believe they last for about 2 years, then the state can kind of buy from you on demand. So that's how CMAS is a little bit different. So you wouldn't be waiting for anything on Cali Procure to say, bid on this CMAS schedule or respond to this CMAS schedule, right? It's a straight application process. So I've talked a lot about acquisition methods, what's exempt from advertising, and now leverage procurement agreements and how they work. Let's actually take a look at Cali Procure so we can see where this information is located. So this is Cali Procure. This should be very familiar to you by now. This is the home page, and we're not logged in yet. Of course, if you were logged into your profile, you would see your work center here, but we're not logged in just yet. And we're going to go to the sell to the state section because that's what we want to do. We want to sell to the state. And at the very bottom of this page, you'll see a link that's called search for state contracts / leverage procurement agreements. And that's where the current existing leverage procurement agreements are going to be. That's not where new ones that you can bid on or respond to will be, right? The ones that are currently open, meaning they're looking to create the leverage procurement agreement and they're getting responses from businesses, that will be in the California State Contracts Register, right? Which you've seen before in a previous presentation. That's where all public competitive bid opportunities are posted in the California State Contracts Register. This is a listing of all currently existing leverage procurement agreements. And when you click that link, it'll take you here. It's a search. The search is actually very similar to the CSCR. You can search by description. You can actually search by acquisition type. That's also methods. So that's a drop down of the different types of acquisition methods. Contract type, that's where you'll get to see like CMAS, MSA, state commodity contracts, that sort of thing. So one of the reasons that this is really useful for you, even though you're not looking for a business to be able to purchase from, or at least I don't imagine you're looking for a business to purchase from. What you can do and really should do in terms of your research is look through the leverage procurement agreements and see if there is one for the products and services you sell. Right? Because if there is, right, let's say you sell concrete and the state does have a statewide commodity contract for concrete. And you're saying to yourself, well, I want to sell to the state. I know the state buys concrete. They have to. They build roads, bridges, buildings. They definitely purchase concrete. But you're not seeing any actual bid solicitations for concrete, right? Like you're not getting notified from Cali Procure that there's a new bid solicitation for concrete. You're maybe not getting a call from a buyer saying, hey, we need to purchase $1 million worth of concrete or $10 million worth of concrete. Can you sell that? It could be because there's a statewide contract for it, right? There's a leveraged procurement agreement. And anytime a buyer needs to buy concrete, they'll say to themselves, why would I go through the trouble of writing up a whole new contract, a statement of work, put it out for bid, and do all this work when there's a leveraged procurement agreement that exists? It's in place. I can use it like that very, very easily. But they're not. They're going to go to that leveraged procurement agreement for concrete, and they're going to purchase from the businesses that hold that particular leveraged procurement agreement. And that's a very important thing for you to know, because then it cues you in to say, well, that means if I want to sell concrete to the state, I need to go get on that leveraged procurement agreement. I need to look at, what is the expiration date of it, so I have an idea about when it's going to go out to bid again. Maybe I want to contact one of those organizations and see if I can be a subcontractor to them, right? Maybe they're a prime, maybe they're a non-certified business and you want to do subcontracting with them. That's always an option. So this really does help in terms of your market research and figuring out what vehicle the state is going to use to purchase a particular good and service. And if you really do need to get on a leverage procurement agreement of some kind. So this is going to kind of wrap up our section on leveraged procurement agreements specifically. Next, we're going to take a look at some just very other common acquisition methods that you will encounter. All right. Requests for quotation. These are going to be everything we're going to look at moving forward is going to be public competitive bidding. All right, so this is stuff that you will see on CaliProcure in the California State Contracts Register. It'll be stuff that's, again, publicly advertised. You could get an email notification from CaliProcure about it. A buyer could also reach out to you directly with an email or a phone call. So a request for quotation, it's probably the simplest of these. It's very simple. It's most commonly used for informal solicitations. It's usually very straightforward. I need X, Y, and Z, and this is the price that I'm going for here. It's generally for smaller contracts up to $100,000. It's, again, most often it's going to be awarded to the lowest bidder that can meet the contract. Just keep that in mind when you see an RFQ. That's the way it's going to be working. I know this can be the low bidder can be tricky because although the state often goes to the lowest bidder, you and I as people, in society will often know that you get what you pay for, and we're sometimes willing to pay a higher price for a higher quality item. And the state sometimes will do that. If the state is going to do that, the criteria is usually weighted. So rather than low cost, it's going to be a weighted criteria for multiple factors. But when it is low cost, it will be of all the businesses who actually meet the needs of the contract and meet that threshold, which one has the lowest price. So again, always something to keep in mind when bidding and going after contract opportunities. The next acquisition method that we're going to talk about is request for information. So the state uses this when it really needs to survey the marketplace. So the state, for instance, may not have a clear idea about what it wants and may not have a clear idea about what exists out in the private sector that could meet a particular need that it has. And so a request for information really is to get a clear idea about what are the possibilities out there? What are the options out there? It could also be used to project how much money is needed. So if the state says, well, we think we want to buy, this kind of an equipment or this kind of service, but we really don't know how much it's going to cost. And we have a set budget, or we're trying to figure out our budget. We need to know how much money we should allocate. This is a process that can be used to do it. It can be also be called a request for interest. So if you see that language, it's the same thing. It doesn't necessarily mean at the end of the day, there's going to be a guaranteed contract, right? Because the state may do an RFI, discover something costs way more than they thought, and it's not going to be in the budget, and so they can't really move forward with the purchase. That happens. And that's kind of what an RFI is used for. So this also can be an opportunity for you as a company if you have something that's new, innovative. Maybe the state doesn't even know about it and therefore doesn't know to purchase it or ask about it. An RFI could be a way to do it. I have often encountered businesses that say, the state's asking for a particular product. I don't have that product, but I have something else that could fulfill the same need. It'll achieve the same objective. It's just a different kind of product, and the state doesn't even know it exists. What do I do? Well, an RFI is one of those things. Asking for a substitution would be another thing. But an RFI is one way to go about sharing that with the state. All right, the next one we're going to talk about is an invitation for bid. This is a bit more straightforward. So again, this is used for simple, common, routine services. It can also be used for non-IT goods over 100,000. So you notice the RFQ is typically up to 100,000 and the IFB is typically over 100,000. Again, it is typically going to be awarded to the lowest bidder unless it is specifically said otherwise. Price is going to be key. I also have a note here that the small business preference and DVB incentive can be applied. So the small business preference, and just so we're clear, it's one of the main benefits of being certified. It applies on all contracts when you are competing against at least one business that is not certified. And you'll get a preference, a 5% for small business, a 5% preference over that business. You won't get any kind of preference against other certified businesses. And the DVB incentive, again, it applies. It really depends on the specific contract. It has to be specifically written into the contract that, yes, there is a DVB percentage or a DVB incentive, and this is the percent. It can be anywhere from 0 to 5. So a good example of an invitation for bid is, so my team, the Office of Small Business and DVB Services, we have needed to hire a photographer and a videographer. We were putting on an event and we needed to do that. We didn't have anybody who could do it in-house for us, so we needed to do a contract. And so it's a contract for a service. It's not really negotiable. You know, we write our statement of work saying this is what we need, and we put it out, and we see who responds. And we typically go with the lowest bidder who meets that threshold of being able to perform the contract. The last one we're going to talk about is request for proposal. This is one of the more complex acquisition methods. It's definitely requires more on the business. So this is when the state does not have an exact idea of what it needs, is aware that something needs to be kind of fixed or done or accomplished, and it is looking for you, the business owner, to propose the solution. So a great example is when the state needs to construct a new building, which happens every now and then. A building is getting renovated or needs to build a new building. That's going to be a hundreds of millions of dollars. Well, rather than the state saying, this is exactly what we want to build, the state does a request for proposal or an RFP and says, we need to build a building that can house 3,000 employees and meets all these other specifications that we need for a state building. Propose something, right? And various companies, construction companies will make their proposals and say, well, this is what you should build. This is what we have in mind. So it does require that you as a business are bringing your expertise and are able to tell the state, this is what I think you should be doing, and this is what you need to do. RFPs are a weighted criteria. So there's lots of different factors that get evaluated in determining if, who's actually going to get it at the very end. It's not just whoever's got the lowest cost. It can be advertised as primary or secondary. So primary is going to be low cost. Secondary is going to be best value. And that's where perhaps you are more expensive than some of your competitors, but you have also a higher value product or a higher value service, and therefore you can win the contract. And of course, these are going to be formally advertised on CaliProcure because this is all public competitive bidding. So an important part with again, a request for proposal is you do need to be able to tell the state, this is what you should be doing. The state is going to look to you for your expertise because you're the expert. Okay, so that's going to wrap up these acquisition methods that we talked about. I'd mentioned there's a lot of them out there. You're not going to encounter a lot of them. The ones we just talked about now are going to be the most common ones you encountered. Again, that was, the contracts that were exempt from advertising, fair and reasonable. That's fair and reasonable, SBDVB option, and emergency contracting. We talked about leverage procurement agreements, kind of the unique type of purchasing that they are. And then we just went through a few different acquisition methods: request for proposal, invitation for bid, request for information, and now request for proposal. So let's shift gears and talk about contract readiness. So now that you have kind of an idea of how the state does its purchasing and the process and the way that it uses to purchase, let's talk about how you as a business can be contract ready. So first key important questions are, can you deliver on the contract? So do you actually meet the contract needs? When the contract says you need to perform these 5 or 6 services, you can actually do all of them, not 1 or 2 of them, but all of them. Or if you can't do all of them, maybe you can do 5 of the 6, but you can't do the 6th. Can you get a subcontractor who can do the 6th one, right? Do you meet the requirements? So some contracts will have very specific requirements in them. Certainly, if you're in the construction field, there may be licensing requirements. So you have to meet those basic requirements. Otherwise, your bid will not be considered responsive, right? Will not be considered a legitimate bid. And then the third big question, do you have the financial capacity? And this might have been mentioned in one of the previous webinars. The state pays after the contract is finished. Most often, it is possible that the state will make payments during the course of the contract. That is more often the case for a very lengthy contract. If the contract's going to be a year, or 2 years, or 3 years, like when you're constructing a building, the state can make payments throughout it. But most often, payment is made when the contract is finished. And the state has up to 45 days after the contract is finished to make payments. So it means that you as a company, you need to be able to upfront the costs to the contract and float the costs for potentially a month and a half. Sometimes the state is late on making payments. Now, when that happens, you're entitled to late fees, so additional money, but it does then mean you'll need to be able to float those costs. And so that means, either you've got enough cash or equity in your business, or you're able to work with financial institutions and lenders to be able to have a line of credit or something like that. So in determining your eligibility, that will also look more specifically at past performance, required experience and skill sets, and production capability. So let's say you produce a particular product, but the state needs to buy 5 million of it, and you can only reliably produce 100,000 or 200,000, right? It might be beyond your capacity as a company. And the state might have certain requirements about past performance. So if the state says, well, on this contract, we need someone who's got 5 years of experience doing this kind of work, and your company and you have only been doing it for 2 or 3, that's something to look at, right? You may not meet that basic criteria. Some other important things to do in terms of contract readiness, keep your certification profile up to date on CaliProcure, right? Make sure the contact information is good, phone numbers, emails, website. Make sure you keep your certification up to date. I would hate for you to lose out on an opportunity because you let your certification lapse, and the buyer is really looking for a certified business to use. That's also true in the middle of a contract. If you get a contract and you're certified and it's part of the reason you got it, it'd be terrible then for partway through you actually lose your certification. And of course, make sure that you are properly licensed and insured. Generally, if you're going to be performing services, involves state property or state personnel, your insurance is going to need to cover the state of California. If you're selling products, then typically not. And again, depending on the field you work in, there are certain licenses associated with it. Obviously, the field of construction, there's various different types of licenses when it comes to contracting. And of course, registering with the Department of Industrial Relations. Being licensed with the Construction Licensing Board. So these are some good tips just to being ready, to figuring out can you and should you really bid on something. So let's talk about some common mistakes that actually show up when bidding. And these are very common. So forgetting to sign all the documents. There are a lot of documents. It's very common that they sign all, but they miss a few, and that can invalidate the contract. Forgetting to return all requested documentation or forms. So in the bid solicitation, there's going to be a lot of very specific directions about what you need to do. And that may involve providing certain documents or filling out certain forms and returning them. You got to make sure you do it all. Not responding by the deadline. So you'll see this if you look in the California State Contracts Register. When you're looking at a contract, it'll have the due date listed on the details. Additionally, if a buyer is emailing you or calling you and saying, I need you to respond, you need to respond by this day and this time, you need to make sure you get it in by that deadline. If it says 2 p.m. on Thursday, they mean 2 p.m. on Thursday, not 2:03 or 2:05, but 2 p.m. Ignoring historical information available for pricing, etc. So if there is already established pricing that is in place and that is what the state is expecting, or if that's already been stated, you need to be able to follow that information and be able to follow that pricing. Incorrect calculations, and this can be on tax rates or on other parts of the documents. Make sure your math is good. Double check it. If there's math that is different or is inconsistent, so it's correct in one place but then off in another place, that can also affect your ability to get the contract. Of course, leaving out required permits, licensing, bonding, that sort of stuff. So, if it says you need to have these specific licenses and you don't include those in your submission, that is going to be a big problem. Substituting items without the consent of the issuing department. So I had mentioned substituting briefly before. So essentially the way this often works is the state will say, for instance, we want to purchase these. Actually, I'll give you an example that's from my team. So every year we do an awards ceremony where we recognize state employees for exemplary service in supporting small businesses and disabled veteran businesses. And we get little trophies, little plaques, things like that as part of the ceremony to give the winners. And every now and then, the ones that we want, the specific ones we want, aren't actually available. And the business that we're purchasing from offers us a substitution and says, I don't have the thing you requested, but here's something else that I think you will like. It is either the same pricing or very close in pricing, and it meets the same specifications that you asked for. Do you accept? And we review it, we talk about it, and then we decide, okay, yes, that's okay. You do need to get permission to substitute items. You can't just do it because you want to, or, without getting the department's consent. That can be a big one because the department may have wanted those products for very specific reasons. Maybe there's compatibility issues. Maybe there's something specific about the product that they really wanted, or quality control issues. So very important. Again, you can substitute, you just need to get permission to do so. Not following all directions on the solicitation. So the bid solicitation may provide very specific directions about how to make a bid response, and you're expected to read all of that, understand that, and follow those directions specifically. It can be concerning for a department if they have this big service contract and they want a business who will understand it and follow those directions, and yet the business isn't able to follow the directions when submitting a bid for that contract. Right, so again, it's critical that you read those directions and follow all of that information. Not filling out the recycled content form. So this is really when it comes to products. The recycled content form is where you designate how much of your products are coming from recycled content. And there's a couple different types. There's pre-consumer recycled content, post-consumer recycled content. And this is all part of the state's initiative and desire to try and be more environmentally sustainable. So just remember, to fill that out. So submitting cost proposal in same package as technical requirement. This is a bit of a more unique mistake that's specific to solicitations where there's actually two separate packages, where there's one that's a cost proposal going over what all the cost breakdowns are going to be, as well as technical requirements. So again, the real takeaway is to be thorough in preparing all of your documents and reading out all the requirements and in responding to that bid solicitation. But these are all very common mistakes, some of which can get you automatically disqualified. So it'd be really unfortunate to make some of these. Now let's have some tips for success. So we're not just focusing on the mistakes. Let's actually talk about what you can do to be successful. So first one, so ask questions early on. So on every single contract, there is what's called a contract administrator. They're the person who's in charge of it, in charge of collecting the bids, in charge of executing it. They're also in charge of responding to questions. So if you see one that you're interested in and you start having questions about it, contact that person on either they're the person who emailed you or called you in the first place, or they're the person listed on the bid solicitation details on CaliProcure. Those same details where you see the due date, where you can read the package and read all the documents. They'll have their name and likely their phone number and their email, and you'll know which department they work for. So ask questions, be proactive about it. Don't, wait until the very last minute or wait until, right when things are due, because you might not get your questions answered in time. Again, make sure you read and understand the scope of work and all the instructions. We've talked about this a few times now. we want to make sure that that's not the reason you don't get your contract. So tips for success after you are awarded the contract. So what we've talked about so far is all about getting the contract, right? Being chosen and selected by the buyer. So these are all going to be tips for now that you've actually gotten your contract, what you need to do to be successful. So one, if you win a state contract, you are legally bound to deliver as promised. So it doesn't work to say, oh, I know I signed this contract, but something came up and I can't really do the job anymore, or I can only do a portion of the job. That is not going to work for the state of California. Once you sign that contract, you're legally bound to deliver. Failing to perform on a state contract is not a good boon for the future. That likely will be noted in terms of your company, and other buyers will see that when they are considering using you. They'll see this company previously failed to deliver on a state contract. We already talked about how many jobs do not pay until the contract is finished. So that's about being able to, cover the cost up front. It's about financial stability. So a lump sum, if a contract has that language saying lump sum, it means you will be given one payment for the entire contract after it has been finished. If it has other language, it might be that you will be paid in installments throughout the course of the contract. Just a couple of tips for performing on the contract. The only other thing I'll add is once you're awarded the contract, you will work more closely with the contract administrator. And that's going to be the person who, on the state side of things, is in charge of the contract and making sure it is being followed and being done and is completed. And so that's really a person you're going to have a relationship with at that point. Prior to winning that contract, you may be working with me and my team because you're trying to get your foot in the door. You may be working with an advocate at the department and talking with them about what opportunities come up. But then once you actually win that contract, you're going to be working with that contract administrator. We'll still be around and be able to help you. But when it comes to matters regarding that specific contract, you'll be working with the contract administrator. All right, we're getting close to the very end here, so we'll be getting to our Q&A shortly. I mentioned that we're going to talk about commercially useful function again, so we're doing that now. So this should be a little bit familiar by now. I'm not going to go through and just read all of these out loud. You can read them yourselves. Essentially, performing a commercially useful function means that you as a business are performing the work of the contract. You are meaningfully and significantly contributing to that contract in a way that is normal and standard for your industry to do. It also means if you're going to be subcontracting, you're doing what is in line with industry practices. You're not subcontracting more than normal. I'll give you a brief example. Again, referring to we had to hire a videographer. I mentioned this before. So when we did this, we actually got a few quotes, and one of them, the person said that they could only perform 20% of the contract. We were going to ask for a bunch of videography, some photography as well, and then some video editing to make short clips. And the person said they can only do 80% of the contract, or they can only do 20, and they had to sub out 80% of it. That's not normal for industry practices for videography and photography gigs. It is normal for there to be a lead person and they have to hire on an additional camera person, right? Or they have to maybe hire out and do a little bit of editing, but it's not normal to sub out 80% of the work. If we're going to have to sub out 80%, we might as well just go to the person that can do that 80% and sub out to you, who will do the remaining 20. And so that to us, that did not meet a commercially useful function threshold. So that person did not get the contract. Someone else did, and they did about 80 or 90% of the work. They ended up hiring a second camera person to help them out. And of course, not performing CUF is doing any of these things. So really when we're talking about not performing CUF is when you're acting as a financial pass-through. So when you're not really performing any of the services, or you're not really supplying any of the goods, you're just a fiscal agent through which funds are passed through. This can also sometimes look like pretending to be part of a contract. So something that does happen, or at least attempts to happen, is a large company who gets a state contract, and the contract says that that large company has to sub out a quarter of the contract to small businesses, right? Because the state has a goal to spend a quarter of all dollars with small businesses. And this is one of the ways the state can make that happen. And the small business says, the large business says to themselves, well, I don't want to. I can do the whole contract myself. I don't want to lose a quarter of this to subs. So here's what I'll do. I'm going to contact a small business and I'm going to tell them, look, I'll give you $50,000 to claim you're doing work on this contract, but you don't have to do anything. It's 50 grand, take it, and you don't have to actually do any work. Right? So that's a CUF violation, and that's fraud. That would be very illegal. And that's an example of a fiscal agent. So that's the business isn't actually doing anything, and funds are simply being passed through them to get the appearance of small business participation. The most important thing when it comes to performing CUF is that you are honest, you're truthful and accurate, you're transparent and forthcoming with information to the buyer, right? So CUF is evaluated on each individual contract at the beginning, at the end, and sometimes during the course of the contract. So it doesn't really have to do that much with your certification. It's not as though once you get certified, you suddenly meet CUF. Nope, it happens on every single contract. And the buyer is the one who decides it. So the buyer evaluates your proposal and determines, do you perform CUF or not? And that's why it's critical that you have to be honest and accurate and transparent about the work that you're going to be doing, about the work that you're going to subcontract out, so the buyer can make the correct decision. It gets to be a problem if you are not wanting to share that information. So I know I've encountered businesses that have said, you know, I sell all sorts of products, but they wouldn't tell me where they get their products. They wouldn't say that they work with manufacturers, which would be normal, right? You work with a manufacturer, you're a distributor or a supplier, and you sell your products. That's normal. That's very normal for industry practices. But they would just say, no, I sell anything and everything. Anything, any product you want, just tell me you want it. I'll go out and get it for you. That raises a bit of a CUF concern. The person is not really being forthright about their business and how they actually operate their company. So as long as you were honest and transparent, you're not hiding anything, you'll be perfectly fine. I know commercial useful function can scare some people and freak some people out. But as long as you're honest and transparent and accurate with the buyer or the contract administrator, you'll be perfectly fine. All right, we're at the tail end here. I know we've covered a lot of information. These are just some quick resources. You've probably seen this before in one of your previous presentations. You'll notice, of course, we have SCORE listed there. If you're here at this webinar, you're already using SCORE as a resource, which is great. There are a couple of other resources as well. We covered a lot of information today. We covered a lot of topics. We talked about kind of how the state buys conceptually, what acquisition methods are and how they work and how the state goes about purchasing. We talked about some contracts that are exempt from advertising, specifically fair and reasonable, SBDVB option, emergency purchases. We talked about leverage procurement agreements and how they work. We also talked about some other acquisition methods or procurement methods. Then we talked about some contract readiness, the common mistakes to avoid, and some tips for success, and of course, commercially useful function to wrap it up. So I want to say thank you all so much for joining and listening. We have a little bit more, so don't go away just yet. If you do have any success stories, so if you've actually contracted with the state and you were successful, we'd love to take down your success stories. We've done this before where we've actually highlighted a few companies for their success stories, done a video about them. It's actually a great way to get some free promotion and marketing for your company. We usually do share those videos with all the state advocates and buyers. So that's a great way to get promoted. If you haven't connected with us on our LinkedIn page, please do so. So we actually have a special LinkedIn page for our Office of Small Business and DVBE Services. It's separate from the DGS LinkedIn page. The DGS LinkedIn page is all about like employment opportunities at DGS if you want to come work here. But our LinkedIn page is all about events like these. So being able to connect with other business owners, connect with other resources, things like that. If you would like to connect with us more, if you'd like some more assistance or information, please book a one-on-one appointment with us. You can use the QR code here on the screen. We have 4 kind of different types of appointments you can book, and you'll get one-on-one personalized assistance from people on my team here at the Office of Small Business and DVB Services. And we can help you with a lot of different aspects of doing business with the state of California. So I want to say thank you all so much for participating. Here is my contact information. So feel free to jot it down right now. It'll also be provided to you later, so you have it. You've got my work phone number there and my email address, and that is to the webpage for my office. So thank you so much. I'm going to turn it back over to Tom, who's going to talk a little bit about some SCORE resources, and then we will be getting to Q&A. So don't worry, we will be getting to Q&A at the very end of this.
Thank you so much, Matt, for a very thorough and insightful and well-presented talk on information we need to know in order to do business with California. We just want to underline the reality that you can get all kinds of help from SCORE. You can go to our resource library. You can check out our workshops. Some are pre-recorded, some are live. We have information on government contracting resources. You can request a mentor at score.org/find-mentor, or you can join SCORE as a volunteer if you bring years of skills in business and you want to start giving back. We want to do a poll before we get to the questions. We have a lot of great questions already in the queue, but you are welcome to add more. And let's see our poll now. So our poll questions are, do you plan on doing business with the state of California? Would you attend a small business roundtable about certification? That would be more of an informal discussion. Would you complete a survey about your business and industry/service, such as construction, more specialized, nuanced? And then would you recommend SCORE to a friend? If you take a moment and answer those questions, I'll give you one more encouragement to find a mentor. And all you have to do is request one. We'll help you with this process or with your business plan or wherever you are. Take another moment. All right, we're ready to see the results. 91% of you expect to do business with the state of California. 82% of you would attend that roundtable. 91% of you are willing to complete a survey. And thank you, 100% of you will recommend SCORE to a friend. By the way, we offer mentoring free of charge. I don't know if that makes a difference to anybody. Sure makes a difference to me. Well, let's delve into these questions, Matt, and you have some support out there in the audience. If we hit some, like if we hit Caltrans or something, we have people like that, like Michael out there. But the first question is from Jacob, and Jacob wants to know, what is the best way to optimize my pricing to ensure I am competitive while still covering my expenses? What is the best database for doing that market research, especially for non-competitive bidding purposes?
Myself. Great question. So that is a great question. That's a really detailed question. So yeah, that's a complicated one. I would say what you can do is try and look up competitors and look up past contracts the state has done to get an idea of what is the price point that the state seems to be going for. So you can do that on a couple different ways. One is on CaliProcure. There's actually kind of a database of past purchases the state has conducted. It is called Skippers. And I can actually, I can probably pull up and share a different screen. I can show you on CaliProcure how you might actually go about doing that. Let me go ahead and share my screen real quick.
While you're looking for that, there you go.
All right, so on Cali Procure, you can easily go to find public procurement information here down at the bottom. And then here, so search for past purchases in the state contract and procurement registration system, or skippers. So this will actually pull up a database, and you can search this. It's not the prettiest looking thing, but you can actually search this. Typically using the description, you type in your particular products or services that you sell, and you would get an idea of what people, what the state has purchased and before for that. So I just search concrete. Hopefully this won't take too long to actually generate results. You will be able to see, you'll basically get a giant grid, kind of like a spreadsheet, and you'll be able to see the other companies who have won those contracts. And you'll get to see the departments that purchased them, how much money was spent. You'll get to see the specific acquisition method that was used. And you'll even get some information on the buyer that conducted the purchase. And so what you can do is, in terms of finding those other companies, you can look and see at what their pricing is, and to see, are they beating you because their pricing is lower, or are they beating you for some other reason? If you are trying to figure out how you can lower your pricing, while also, keeping your business up and not cutting into profits or not being able to cut into other things, that's not really a question I can answer for you. I'm not a business finance expert or a business planning expert that can help you answer the question of how to decrease your costs as a company. I'd probably direct you more towards SCORE for something like that, and getting advice about how to decrease some internal costs so you can therefore bring down some of your pricing.
Matt,
It's probably a little like riding a
actually a
bike.
very good question answer there, Matt. What this allows those that are new at bidding, and what am I bidding for? That's really a unknown for a lot of the new people in the process. This program that Matt just demonstrated for you, you can actually compare apples with apples and see the description that they're using, the materials they're using. And if you're already in the industry, you already know what those costs are, and for labor and that sort of thing. So actually, we call market research, and this is an excellent way. And Matt, the way you explained it, that's what we do. That's what I did when I was doing bidding. And unknown, what am I bidding against, and the materials used, it's all there for you. And this is why they accept, and that's just a great tool. And Matt, thank you for sharing. That's excellent.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you.
I'll add that, if you're really wanting to look at the details and the specifics, like there's a particular contract in mind, you're wondering why you lost that one contract and how did another company beat you, like what was their pricing. If you know the specific contract, you can contact the contract administrator and ask for a debrief. And hopefully they're willing to give you a debrief, and they can talk to you about why your company wasn't selected. And if you really want the details, you can do what's called a public records request, and you can get the full and complete documents for that contract, and then you can actually see, was the company cheaper than you, or did they have something else? Was it a weighted criteria when the contract was awarded, and there was something else about their bid that got them the contract?
Matt, that's a great link. If you could type that in the chat, or I think maybe Christina has it, we'll send it, or just give it to us later. We'll send it out with the email, because that is an excellent tool. Is there any way in that interview, that debrief, maybe to get the range of bids that people put in?
So that would need to be a public records request. So buyers are not just going to say, here's all the other bids that businesses selected.
No,
yeah, you would need to submit a public records request, and what kind of information specifically would be provided to you in a public records request is not something I could explicitly speak to. That request is taken up by the department and the team at that department that kind of handles that request. So that would really be something you'd have to look into specifically with that organization.
That was a great answer. Here's another one from Krishna. We have a CMAS contract, and if you'll define the acronym, that'd be great when you answer it. How and what are some steps we can take to improve our chances to win a project?
Great question. So CMAS is the California Multiple Awards Schedule program. It's also called CMAS. It is one of the leverage procurement agreements we talked about in the webinar today. So great question. And that is a very real thing that businesses experience, where you might hold a CMAS, but so might 30 other companies. How do you make yourself noticed among those 30 companies? So there's a couple things. One, in CMAS, while there is kind of a cap on your pricing, so one way to make yourself more noticeable is you can actually offer a lower price than what's in the CMAS schedule. So if the CMAS schedule for a consultant service is $140 an hour, you could choose to offer lower than that. That can give the buyer a reason to go to you. Now, again, that comes back to the, can you do lower pricing, or is that going to be difficult for your business to survive with that? The other thing you can do is you can actually try and market yourself some more. So that means doing some research into which departments you think are most likely to purchase your services or your products. And, that will help you narrow down, of all these departments, which ones are likely to buy your products or services. The way you can do that research is a couple ways. One, go to Skippers, which we just talked about, and look for your products and services. You can even narrow it to search by CMAS specifically in your CMAS contract. So you can see which departments have been purchasing off of the CMAS contract that you hold, and which of the other businesses on that list have they been going to, right? Then you can look up your competitors and see, why are they getting these contracts? How are they better than you? But it gives you the names of the departments. Once you know who these departments are, you can connect with the small business advocate at that department, right? And you can contact them. The information of the advocates is also on CaliProcure. It's under the training and resources section. And introduce yourself, ask to have a meeting, see if you can get their attention. Because while you're certified, other CMAS holders may not be certified, and they might be large companies. Anybody can have a CMAS schedule, even a massive corporation. And they may have, because of that, they may have lower pricing. So that's one of the main ways you can try and make yourself a little bit more appealing as a CMAS holder. And again, if you want assistance with any of that, I know I mentioned doing a lot of different things. If you want assistance with that, you have the Microsoft bookings that I talked about. We can schedule a one-on-one appointment, and one of the people on my team can walk you through doing all of that.
Excellent, Matt. I have a question from Fernando. I'm not sure you'll be able to answer it, but we can help find that information. We have other webinars on that, and we have mentoring for this. But where's the best place to get working capital until the contract pays out? I think that might be in one of our
so that's a great question. I'll let you answer that one, Tom.
Oh, so we have in our simple steps to starting your new business, our entire 5th session is funding sources.
Can I jump in, Tom? We have we have a target workshop specific for the group here today as part of your business model canvas or capability study is access to capital. That will be a separate webinar. Watch for the roundtables. Tom mentioned a roundtable for certifications. We'll be posting that soon as we finish here. But there's be a process we call target roundtables specifically for you. And for that question, do you need access to capital for bidding and contracting? And we're going to cover that with a banker, a financial advisor, and also another contractor. So watch for that. Everybody on this call will be emailed that information. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. That is excellent information.
Yeah.
And please.
I'll just add, so it's a great question about access to capital. We recognize that one of the biggest barriers and struggles that businesses face, particularly small businesses, when it comes to doing state contract work, is access to capital, is getting that money to be able to perform the contract. And that is a really, really difficult piece. The state doesn't offer business financing explicitly. There are other programs in the state of California. They're not DGS, they're not Department of General Services programs to help small businesses, and they're not necessarily related to specific contract work. The Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, they specifically have a program called the Office of the Small Business Advocate. They have a number of different grant-based programs and financial relief-based programs that are geared towards helping small businesses. I can't talk at length about what they are and if you qualify and how it all works, but I would encourage you to explore that as a company. There may be something for you, depends on your company. There's stuff around getting relief from COVID. There's stuff around innovation. But that is potentially something there for you. And other than that, it is, as Peter and Tom have said.
A lot of good information coming down the pike. And watch your email. And also you can check back if you think you missed it at centralvalley.score.org. We've been asked, what do you recommend if I want to partner with businesses to win these contracts? I don't want to violate CUF, but I want to help write proposals and manage the contract. Would be considered a joint venture? So that's a good question, isn't it?
That's actually a really great question. Thank you for asking that. We didn't really talk about partnerships as a strategy for tackling bigger contracts or creating more stability for yourself so you can effectively take on a state contract, but that is absolutely an option. And I appreciate you using the words about forming a partnership or what's called a joint venture. So whether or not you will meet CUF and how it all works will depend on. So if you are forming a joint venture, it means you're technically forming a new business entity, a temporary business entity, and it is that business entity that will win the contract. So maybe each of you are only doing half of the contract, and normally perhaps that might be a CUF issue because it might not be normal for you to only do 50% of the work, but the joint venture is one business entity and it's doing 100% of the work. Or maybe it's doing 90 and you still have to sub out the other 10. That's actually totally fine. You're not going to come into a CUF violation that way because, again, it's the joint venture that is winning the contract and it is performing the contract. And again, this would all be made very clear to the buyer. So this would be very explicit. This is a joint venture. That is the business. And you shouldn't have a problem meeting a commercially useful function. It is also a great way to form business partnerships and relationships. So you can make friends rather than competitors doing it this way. And you might be able to take on contracts that are currently out of your reach a little bit as a standalone business. So there's a lot of different benefits to doing it that way. So it definitely is something to consider. Now, when it comes to actually forming that partnership or that business venture and whether in a specific instance it's a good idea and if it's a good idea to work with a particular organization, that's not something my team can help you with. That's probably something that SCORE is going to be able to help you with more and being able to decide, is that a good move for your company? Is the other company you want to partner with, stable, reliable, has a good reputation, that kind of stuff.
Quick follow-up on that, Matt.
Mm-hmm.
In the nonprofit world, I've found that some of the RFPs favor those kinds of joint ventures. And I don't know, why don't we leave that for another time rather than go sideways? What examples of situations where contracts are paid prior to completions? Are any contracts prepaid, especially for tangible goods?
So not that are immediately coming to mind. There is not any sort of standard around what kinds of contracts are prepaid. Contracts for goods are going to be less likely to be prepaid. The payment is usually done upon receipt of those goods and upon kind of receipt or certification that the goods have been delivered as promised, that they're not damaged or anything like that. So it's not likely to be happening for goods. I personally haven't seen a specific example where a contract is paid ahead of time. I'll never say never because there's thousands upon thousands of contracts out there and there's billions of dollars. So I'm never say never. So it is most likely going to be paid after the contract is fully finished. Or potentially during the course of the contract. Again, that's usually only the case if it's a very lengthy contract and it is more normal to get paid over the course of it. So when we had to hire the videographer and the photographer to perform services, that was one where they get paid after the contract. And that means they record our large event And then they spend weeks after that doing video editing and sending us all the clips that they had to make. And once we received all the clips and we certified, yes, this has fulfilled the final contract, then we send it to, accounting, who can then actually formally make the payment.
Super. Thank you so much. We're a small business with less than 4 employees. We hire consultants or temporary staff for projects. Will this impact negatively when we respond to an RFPS and want to win bigger contracts?
So it's a great question. It won't in terms of your bid response. No. So they won't look at so how many employees do you have exactly, or exactly what kinds of employees that you have. You will. It may potentially affect commercially useful function, and it really depends on how you do it. So if you're hiring a lot of consultants who are private contractors, so they're not employees of your company, but private contractors, that then may become a cuff issue, because that means you're technically subcontracting to them. If you're bringing people on as employees, then there is no cuff issue because they are employees of your company. It is therefore your company doing the work. So yeah, in the state bidding, as long as you can perform those bids, that's fine. I haven't personally seen any issues of saying, well, if we get this contract, we'll hire on more people and they'll do the work. That's your decision as a company. That shouldn't really be affecting your bidding process at all.
Your capability to hire them is important, so that's great. Ronaldo is asking, what qualifies as a small business in California? That's probably a quick question. You probably have it on the chart.
Yeah, great question. I don't have it on today's slides because it wasn't part of the presentation, but so basics. The business headquarters need to be in California. The owners or officers need to also live in California. The business needs to have less than 100 employees or less. $16 million in gross annual receipts is the cap. And that's averaged over 3 years. So if you had 17 million one year and then 14 another and 12 another, I'm not a mathematician, but I'm pretty sure the average of that is going to be less than $16 million. And there's a couple of other minor things, like you can't be the dominant field or the dominant business in your field of operation. Those are the basic requirements. If you're a manufacturer, there's the 100 employee cap. There's no gross annual receipts cap. So you can grow quite large as a manufacturer. Of course, that can be hard to do with only 100 employees. And that's for the regular small business certification. And then there's small business for public works. And that's everything's the same, except the employee cap is 200 and the gross annual receipts cap is 37 million. And that'll actually be going up to 38 million in January of 2023. And again, that certification, the public works, is only for businesses that cannot get the regular small business one.
Follow up to that, Matt, is the 16 million based on California fiscal year or tax year?
That's going to be tax year.
Okay.
Yeah, gross annual receipts as reported in taxes.
Forgive me for all my interruptions, by the way. How do you recommend building past performance?
That's a good question. So building past performance, when the state says, look, you need to have 3 years doing this or 4 or 5 years doing this, getting experience with government at the smaller level. So trying to do work for a city or a county first, or even private sector work. So I haven't personally seen too much where the state says you need 5 years experience, like specifically at the state level doing it. It's usually in your career. And then also there's a bit of interpretation to do. So for instance, you might have been working in the field for a decade, but your company is 2 or 3 years old. So when they're talking about experience, again, it really depends on the contract language and stuff. If what they're hiring is a consultant who's got experience and expertise, and you've got 10 years as a person, even though your company is only 3 years old, I think you can make a better case for saying, I've been doing this for 10 years and therefore meet that requirement. But it's true that sometimes at the state, maybe your company is a little too new and doesn't quite have the experience you need to work at the state level. That's also true at the feds. So the feds will often say, well, if you're not quite ready for a federal government contract, try working with the state first. Because we're smaller than them. You know, we spend 8 to 10, you know, we spend what, 10 to 12 billion dollars every year in contract work. And for the feds, $10 billion might be one contract. But yeah, so hopefully that helps in terms of where you can try and get some experience before you go after state contracts. I'll say along that note, I'll mention our reciprocity partners. So we didn't talk about it in this presentation. It did come up in a previous one where there are cities, counties, local utilities, transportation agencies, even school districts that recognize and accept the state of California's small business certification and or disabled veteran business certification. Meaning if you're certified with us, you're considered a small business when you go to work with them. And usually that means you will be granted certain contracting preferences and bonuses, just like the kinds of bonuses you have here at the state. They do vary sometimes. Sometimes they have local eligibility requirements, but often they're very much the same.
The word
you can start with one of those reciprocity partners.
You want to inquire, use the term reciprocity partner when you inquire with the locality. So I think we've exhausted our questions, Matt. We want to remind everyone that our next in this series is, am I correct to say October 7th? We changed it to October 7th, and that is our Meet the Buyers.
That's correct.
And so that's going to be a really great nuts and bolts opportunity for you to be a part of that. And you will receive the link to register. Matt, you've done a great job. I congratulate all of you who've stayed the whole time, and most of you did. I think that you have now, Christina just put the registration in the chat. That means it will be in your presentation when you receive it in the mail. But I think that all of you are better equipped to get a contract with the state of California than you were an hour and a half ago. So we're going to have a little debrief. So we thank you for coming, and we're going to, we'll stay on for each other, but have a great day. Have a great lunch.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much for your time.
Jaspreet, Michael,